On April 9th, the FIA will hold the most important meeting Formula One has seen in years. Every team boss will be there, every engine maker, every top official with the power to reshape the 2026 rules that have already produced a 50-DG crash, a qualifying disaster, and a near-total driver revolt. So why is the one group of people who actually drive these cars at 300 km/h completely locked out of the room? If you had asked anyone in the Formula One paddock 12 months ago what the biggest threat to the sport's future would be, nobody would have said the way the sport is run. They would have talked about cost caps or the engine power gap closing, or maybe the calendar getting stuffed beyond 24 races. Nobody was looking at the meeting rooms in Paris, where the technical rules were being locked in behind closed doors. Nobody was asking who had a vote, and who did not. Nobody was asking whether the whole system was broken. That silence is exactly how the sport arrived at the most dangerous turning point it has faced in a generation. Because while 20 drivers were getting ready to race under a brand new set of technical rules, the people writing those rules never once gave those drivers a real voice in the process. Lewis Hamilton made that truth impossible to ignore at the Japanese Grand Prix weekend, after finishing 6th at Suzuka, a result that left him clearly angry. The 7-time world champion walked into the media zone and fired off the sharpest attack on Formula One's rulemaking that any active driver has made in recent memory. The FIA's process for writing rules, in his view, has too many chefs in the kitchen, too many competing interests from engine makers protecting their money, team bosses protecting their edge, business partners protecting their income, and FIA officials protecting their power. The result is a system that spits out watered-down rules that please nobody, least of all the people who have to race under them. Hamilton went further than anyone expected. The doubt about the April summit was not about how tricky the technical problems are. It was about Formula One politics. The plain truth is blunt. Drivers have no voting rights on the technical groups where rules are debated and decided. They hold no formal seats. They have no way to block a rule change they believe is dangerous. The system treats them as advisors at best and ignored voices at worst. They can raise concerns through the GPDA, through media interviews, through WhatsApp groups that light up after every session. And the groups in charge can nod along and then vote however they want. Hamilton did not soften this with careful language. Drivers have no power, and the emergency summit set for April 9th is unlikely to produce anything real, because the power gap means the loudest voices in the room belong to people who have never driven a Formula One car at racing speed. And this is not some big picture worry about who sits in which meeting. This is about what happens when cars moving at 300 km/h run into problems that the people making the rules never felt firsthand. On lap 22 of the Japanese Grand Prix, Oliver Barnes was moving at 308 km/h down a straight at Suzuka when he came up behind Franco Colinto's Alpine. Colapinto's car had dropped to roughly 260 km/h because its power unit had switched to harvest mode, pulling electrical energy away from the rear wheels to recharge the battery. That created a closing speed of nearly 50 km/h between two Formula One cars on the same stretch of track. At those speeds, the gap between them closed in a split second. Behrman had no time to react, no time to lift, no time to find a gap. He went onto the grass at full speed, lost control right away, and hit the barriers at 50G. The onboard footage showed the impact, snapping his head sideways with a force that silenced the Suzuka paddock. He walked away from the wreck with a bruised knee and shaking hands. But the line between walking away and not walking away at 50G comes down to tiny details in barrier design and the exact angle of impact. The next driver in the same spot might not walk away at all. The quick reaction from inside the paddock was blunt: 50G. Imagine what kind of crash you could have at tracks like Las Vegas or Baku, where the walls are concrete and the runoff is measured in centimeters. The crash was not a freak accident. It was not a racing mistake or a one-off failure on a single car. It was the exact scenario drivers had been warning the FIA about since preseason testing in Bahrain. The GPDA had clearly flagged that these kinds of crashes were bound to happen under the current rules. The drivers had raised the alarm together about massive speed gaps between cars on the same straight. Something Formula One had simply never seen before these rules showed up. The slower car stuck in harvest mode had no way to warn the car behind, and no way to avoid turning into a wall on a 300 km/h racetrack. Pay attention to what happens next, because it shows everything about why Hamilton's attack on the system cuts so deep right now. The meeting set for April 9th will bring together the technical bosses from all 11 teams. People from all 5 engine makers will be at the table, including Mercedes, Ferrari, Red Bull Powertrains, Honda, and Audi. Top FIA leaders will run the talks. Formula One management officials led by Stefano Domenici will attend. The GPDA will not be asked to join the sessions where choices are made. No current driver will have a vote. No driver voice will sit on the panels looking at the technical data. The meeting will deal with super clipping dangers, the qualifying energy crisis, and the software problems that have turned the 2026 power units into wild machines that punish drivers for pushing too hard. Every single one of those issues is something drivers feel in the cockpit through their hands, their bodies, and their gut feel at racing speed. The people in that room will be looking at computer models on screens. The people shut out of that room felt the data through their spines at 50G. And not one of them will be there when the final choices are made. The technical failures on the list are not small tuning problems that can be patched with a software update and a press release. They stand for 3 core breakdowns in how the 2026 rules go from theory on paper to real racing on real tracks. The first is super clipping. When the motor generator unit switches to harvest mode at full throttle, it strips up to 250 kW of energy away from the rear wheels. That leaves the engine on its own, making roughly 135 brake horsepower. A modern fast road car makes more than that. The result is sharp mid-straight speed drops of 50 to 60 km, and those drops are invisible to the car behind. One car is pushing full electric power. The next car is harvesting. The speed gap between them is something Formula One has never seen in its 70-year history, and it is the direct cause of the closing speed that sent Behrman into the barriers. The second failure has turned qualifying into something no one would recognize. Drivers in the 2026 cars cannot push for a flat-out flying lap the way they used to. They must harvest and send battery power, even during their qualifying laps, turning the most thrilling sessions of a race weekend into an energy puzzle, rather than a test of raw speed and nerve. The driver anger boiled over at Suzuka with Charles Leclerc calling the qualifying rules a joke over team radio in words far more heated than can be repeated here. Lando Norris showed an even scarier side effect. He hit debris during qualifying because he was watching his steering wheel to check battery levels instead of watching the track ahead of him. Formula One qualifying has become an exercise in reading dashboard numbers at 270 km/h. That is not what the top level of motor racing is supposed to look like. The third failure lives inside the software itself. The power unit control systems use self-learning programs that adjust energy output based on what the driver does. At the Chinese Grand Prix, a small throttle lift bilayer on the way into a braking zone caused the software to adjust its model the wrong way. The system punished him for a driving move that would have been normal under the old rules. That one glitch destroyed his qualifying lap through no mistake of his own. The feeling across the grid is one of being cut off from the car. Drivers cannot guess how the power unit will act from one corner to the next, because the program is always rewriting its own playbook. 6 proposed fixes are on the April 9th list, and every single one comes with a trade-off that the absent drivers would have strong views on. Raising superclipping power from 250 to 350 kW would shrink the speed gap between harvesting and non-H harvesting cars. Cutting peak output below 350 kW would make the cars slower overall, but smooth out the speed curve and get rid of the worst closing speed dangers on straights. Dropping qualifying harvest needs from 9 megajoules down to as low as 6 would ease the heavy energy recovery on push laps. Though it would also add more than 2 seconds to lap times, a huge penalty that reshapes the whole pecking order. Opening up active wing settings in qualifying by removing FIA set zones entirely would cut drag and stretch battery range. Cleaning up the software, causing the wild behavior would fix the problem the clerk ran into directly, and shifting the balance between fuel power and electric power toward more engine output is being talked about. Though that last fix cannot come until 2027, because the engines are already built to the current spec. Left off the list entirely is the yo-yo racing problem, where cars keep swapping places on the same straight as their power cycles flip back and forth. Drivers hate it. Formula One management does not see it as urgent. That gap between what drivers live through and what officials care about is the whole system problem in one small example. And it is the gap Hamilton is trying to force the sport to face before April 9th. The people with scars from the problem are not allowed in the room where the fixes get chosen. That is the system Hamilton wants torn open. What makes the driver revolt so striking is not that it exists. Drivers have pushed back on rules before. What makes this one different is how united it has become across battle lines that normally keep these people at each other's throats. Max Verstappen has been the loudest voice, calling the 2026 car's Formula E on steroids, and comparing the on-track product to playing a video game, where the boosts matter more than driver skill. He has openly hinted at stepping away from the sport entirely. A winning car alone is not enough. It needs to be fun to drive as well. That line landed like a grenade in the paddock, because Verstappen is not a driver who makes empty threats. He walked away from sim racing for weeks to make a point about track limits in 2023. He boycotted press events over swearing rules in 2024 when he says the car is not fun. The message is that his patience has a limit, and the sport is pushing it. The signs point toward a break rather than leaving for good. But the weight his absence would carry is huge. The reigning world champion walking away from Formula One over rule quality would set off a business crisis that no sponsor, broadcaster or race host could brush off. Norris, the reigning world champion, was crushing in his plainness. Formula One went from making the best cars ever to probably the worst in a single rule change. The madness of a sport that spent years perfecting how air flows under the car, only to force a power unit design that made all those gains nearly pointless, was not lost on him. When the question of what joy he gets from driving the 2026 cars came up, the pause lasted several seconds before a two-word answer. Not really. Fernando Alonso brought the phrase battery world championship into the paddock, and pointed out that the energy management made certain corners so easy that a team's cook could drive through them without trouble. Behind the scenes, the GPDA's private chats were on fire. The drivers' WhatsApp group had been blowing up with activity in the days after the Japanese Grand Prix. The level of buzz was rare, even by the group's own standards, with drivers sharing their anger, floating technical fixes of their own, and debating how to make the decision-makers listen. A separate crisis meeting between the FIA, Formula One management, and GPDA leaders was held during the forced break, caused by cancelled races earlier in the season. That meeting seems to be fully separate from the formal April 9th summit, where actual rule votes will be cast and final choices locked in. The only real pushback against sweeping changes comes from the two fastest teams under the current rules. Mercedes and Ferrari have gained the most from the 2026 rules as they stand. George Russell leads the drivers' standings. Hamilton himself is fighting for wins at Ferrari. The tension is clear. Some teams will always defend rules that happen to suit their speed, and that is fair enough from their side. The result is an awkward truth. The teams with the most pull inside the FIA's decision-making setup are the ones with the least reason to change the rules, and the drivers with the most to say about the racing itself have zero formal way to say it. Hamilton's attack on the system fits inside a pattern of driver FIA clashes that goes back decades. The Grand Prix Drivers Association was founded in 1961, and has fought with the governing body again and again over safety, and having a say across the sport's history. The drivers boycotted Spa-Francorchamps in 1969 over safety fears at the track. They went on strike at the 1982 South African Grand Prix over license rules they saw as unfair. The modern version of this fight has gotten much sharper under FIA President Mohammed Ben Sulayem, who was elected in December 2021 and re-elected with no opponent in December 2025, after a messy process where rival candidates pulled out amid claims that the system was rigged. And the list of clashes under his watch reads like a sport actively at war with its own stars. The jewelry and underwear crackdown pushed Hamilton to wear 3 watches to a press event as a pointed protest. The swearing penalties led to Verstappen's famous one-word answer boycott at the 2024 Singapore Grand Prix, where he refused to give real answers to official media in a planned act of defiance. Top FIA officials left in waves during Benolem's time, including race director Niels Wittig. The deputy president, Robert Reid, quit with a letter that painted a damning picture of rot inside the group, pointing to a steady wearing away of the values the FIA had promised to uphold when the current leaders took over. When the GPDA sent a formal open letter in November 2024, asking for money details from the FIA and urging Ben Sulayem to cool his tone toward drivers, the reply was cold. Drivers should stick to what they do best, which is race. Their worries about how the sport is run were none of their business. George Russell, serving as GPDA director since 2021 alongside SCS, pushed for real changes to the system, including paid full time stewards to replace the rotating volunteer setup. Ben Sulam shot the idea down in public. The director role turned out to be far more political than anyone expected, and the picture of where things stood was grim. The drivers had not spoken any further with FY leaders since the open letter was sent. The door was shut. Hamilton added a layer to his attack at Suzuka that most talk around the sport missed. Even as he went after the system with real force, he stood up for Formula One's business health with equal strength. The Formula One movie won an Oscar for Best Sound at the 98th Academy Awards on March 15. The sport's global audience is at record levels. Money coming in under Liberty Media's ownership has blown past anything anyone expected. An early doubt about American owners has given way to the view that the growth has been truly good for the sport. The case Hamilton laid out was sharp and built on a strange clash. The brand has never been stronger. The audience has never been bigger. The money has never been higher. And the on-track racing has never been more damaged by rules designed without real input from the people who put their bodies on the line every other weekend. It is a strange kind of crisis. The grandstands are full. The TV numbers keep climbing. The Netflix show brought in millions of new fans who now watch every race. The movie just won an Academy Award. And the drivers who make all of that worth watching are telling anyone who will listen that the cars are broken, and the system running the sport is worse. Formula One is at the same time the most money-rich and most poorly run it has ever been. Hamilton was the only driver at Suzuka who put both sides of that clash into the same breath, and it made his words harder to wave away than the ones that only focus on what is wrong. The technical problems can be solved before Miami on May 3rd. Superclipping settings can be changed through software updates that need votes but not new parts. Qualifying energy limits can be cut. Active wing zones can be opened up. Those are engineering choices that need sign-off from the groups in charge, not factory rebuilds. The bigger problem is harder to fix. Hamilton's chefs in the kitchen image captures a system where business interests, engine maker politics, and team rivalry push out the views of the 20 people who climb into cockpits at 300 km every other weekend. The near-total driver revolt, Verstappen's threat to walk away, and Beeman's crash create rare pressure for real change. The FIA's record under its current leaders, though, hence that the power gap will last longer than any technical tweak. Drivers have been asking for a seat at the table for years. The table keeps getting moved around. New chairs get added for engine makers and business partners. The answer to drivers keeps being no. And every time a rule gets written without their input, the risk grows that the next Behrman crash ends differently. What lasts from this moment will not be the specific kilowatt numbers or the power split details that get adjusted at the April 9th summit. What lasts is the question Hamilton forced into the open at Suzuka. Can a sport that brings in billions in income, wins Oscars, and fills grandstands on 6 continents keep shutting out the 20 people whose safety depends on getting the rules right? The summit will answer the technical questions. Whether it answers that one is a different matter entirely. And, if you want to stay across every update coming out of that meeting, and everything that follows at the Miami Grand Prix, make sure you are subscribed with notifications turned on. We will have the full breakdown the moment choices are made. Until then, thanks for watching, and we will see you in the next one.